rooms framed by magnificent woodwork and intricate tin ceilings. The downstairs hall runs straight, with offices on either side. It kind of reminds me of a mausoleum, in a good way. About halfway down the hall is an open set of stairs going up to the second floor, with 20 steps up, a landing, and another 15 steps up, with a fancy open wrought iron railing protecting the top of the stairwell. The landing of the stairwell is blocked off with a large curtain to keep the heat downstairs in the winter. We can't see the second set of stairs because of the huge curtain. The upstairs is not in use right now, nor has it been for decades. Peeling paint and very old decor, kind of a time warp. It's laid out with a hall running horizontal to the stairway. To the right of the stairs at the end of the hall are doorways to various vacant offices. The office at the very end has an enclosed stairway leading to a huge attic that is more like a covered bridge. So I'm told. I've never been up that far. I've looked up the attic steps, which are old wooden steps that take a curve and then continue up. No windows up that far. Straight across from those stairs are other doorways to more unoccupied offices. Some of those offices store long-forgotten files and books from tenants who moved on decades ago. At the other end of the hall is a huge meeting room that is behind 2 huge swinging doors, with another office off that room and various smaller offices just inside the swinging doors. So that's the layout of the place. Here is the freaky story. One morning I arrived at 8 a.m., the first person in the building. I normally go in and turn on the hall lights and unlock the back door. This particular morning, I went in and turned on the hall lights and started down the hall past the stairway to unlock the back door. Just as I got to the bottom of the stairs, I heard what sounded like a lot of activity upstairs. It sounded like walking and scooping, as if someone was scooping something up with a shovel and another person was walking around. Scooping, scooping, walking, walking. At least 2 people. I went down the hall and unlocked the back door and came back to the bottom of the stairs. My first thought was that the noises had to be coming from outside because there should be no one upstairs, and I was the first one in the building. Normally, when someone is walking upstairs, the floors creak and groan as if the person upstairs is going to come through the floor. I walked down the hall to my office trying to figure out what was going on and who could be up there. I could still hear the commotion upstairs, but the weird thing was that while I was hearing the footsteps upstairs, there was no creaking or groaning from the weight of anyone, only the sound of footsteps and scraping. I walked down the stairway again. This time, I walked up to the landing and stuck my head through the curtain, turning my ear up, but not looking upstairs. I could still hear the footsteps and the scraping, and it even sounded like someone walked right up to the edge of the stairs, just feet from me. I was so scared, I didn't look, and I resisted the urge to point my camera phone up there, afraid of what I might catch on it. I listened for a few more minutes. Then I decided there had to be someone up there. So I went back to my office and called the owner of the building to come and investigate. I was sure there had been squatters up there. As soon as I called him, I went back down and stayed on the stairs, listening to what was happening upstairs. My head through the curtain and my ear tipped up, not wanting anyone to be able to sneak down those stairs before the owner arrived to investigate. His office wasn't too far away, so I'd say he arrived in about 5 minutes. The noise continued with vigor while I was waiting. But the scraping and the walking stopped the second the owner opened the back door of the building. I told him I thought someone was up there. He bravely ran upstairs and checked it out. I could hear him walking all over upstairs, and I even heard him go into the attic steps. After a little while, he came back down and said there was no one up there, and no sign of anyone having been up there. I have no idea what went on that morning. It's not the first strange thing that has happened in that building, but it was the longest lasting that I'm aware of, and it really freaked me out. Part 2. The basement. The basement of the building is set up the same way as the first floor, a long straight hallway with many rooms off to the side, including the electrical room and the boiler room. There are also several defunct bank vaults down there. We use the basement for storage of our files. At the time of this story, there were 2 businesses in the building, so there were 2 rooms in the basement being used for storage. One day, a new employee who had been on the job for a day or 2 went to the basement to retrieve a file. She came back upstairs and asked me if I had gone down to get her while she was there. No, I hadn't. She said, as soon as she got to the basement hall, a female voice down there called her name firmly and clearly from behind her. Other than her, there were only 2 other females in the building, me and the boss, and we were both at our desks working. Normally, the basement smells strongly of musk and dankness, a nasty, dark, dirty place that's full of bats. They fly by, walk on the floor, and hang on the walls. One day I went down there to get a file, and as I walked down the hall, I walked into a cloud of expensive-smelling perfume. I was the first person down there that day. There was no one else to leave a cloud of perfume down there. The other secretary and I got up the nerve at that point and searched the basements for signs of anyone living down there. Not a sign. The dust and dirt were not disturbed. No sign of anyone having been in the dark corners. The only toilet in the basement still had no water in it. If someone had been squatting down there, they would have needed to flush the toilet. I've since flushed it and made sure it got its water in it. The floors around my office are hardwood. We all know the sound of an office chair as it rolls across the floor, and what it sounds like when a person is in the basement under the chair rolling across the wood floor. Well, imagine the opposite. I've been sitting in my office chair at the desk, the only person in the building, and I will hear the sounds of an office chair rolling across the floor, but the sound was coming from right under me, as if the chair is rolling on the ceiling of the basement. That happened all last summer. Yeah, true story. Another gal once had a small business in one of the offices. She would work her day job, and once in a while she would come into the office overnight to work on her small business. Several years after she moved out of the office in our building, she came back to visit for a few minutes. I wanted so badly to ask her if she had ever experienced anything odd in the building, but I didn't want to lead or influence her. I asked her if she liked the new office in her new building, and if she missed the old building. She talked about her new office and the extra room that was there. She looked at me and said, "The old office was creepy sometimes." She often felt like someone walked up behind her, even though it would be 2 a.m. She was alone in the building, and her office door was locked. She expected to turn and see someone standing behind her. There was never anyone there. She said the final straw was, one time, again in the middle of the night, she felt someone walk up behind her. She turned around. No one was there, of course, so she went back to working on her project. The next thing she knew was her electric pencil sharpener turned on as if it were being used. She decided to leave the building at that point. Several of us in the building have felt someone walking up behind us, as if the unseen person was inches away, standing very close. If you recall my last story, I told you that the upstairs had 2 huge swinging doors. There have been several instances when I'm in the building first thing in the morning, walking down the hall to open the back door, when I'd hear the doors of the upstairs swinging back and forth, as if someone were going back and forth through them. No footsteps, just the doors swinging back and forth. After I heard the scraping and the walking that one day, I ran into a guy who used to have an office in the building. He had moved out several years previously. He occasionally had to stay overnight in the office because of his job, so I wondered if he'd ever heard anything. Since he is a forthright person, I knew I could just ask him if anything weird had happened while he was staying overnight. He said, "Yeah, it's a creepy building, especially the upstairs." He said he had heard the upstairs doors swinging in the middle of the night. And the next story is from Gemma in Manchester, England. Harry did it. I moved into a house in August of 2014 with my 3-year-old son. I was a single mum, so it was just the 2 of us moving in. The house was a small Victorian terraced house. After a few weeks of living there, my son started to talk about someone called Harry. My son would sit at the table and say his cutlery was Harry's. He would play in his bedroom talking to someone. I would ask who it was, and he would reply, "It's Harry." At first I thought, oh, how sweet. He has an imaginary friend. That was until strange things started happening. In my son's bedroom, there was a storage cupboard that was high up on the wall. For me to open it, I would have to stretch right up to be able to reach the handle. Each evening I took my son up into bed. The cupboard door would be wide open. I would close it and just forget about it. But it kept happening. He had a safety gate on his bedroom door, as the stairs were directly outside his bedroom. I woke up one night and found my son lying next to me in his bed, fast asleep. I figured he must have gotten the gate open somehow. But the next morning I checked the gate, and it was locked. Even the extra lock at the bottom was secured. I didn't think much of it until it happened again the next night. Keep in mind that my son had problems with his gross motor skills, and still does now 4 years on, so it would have been physically impossible for him to climb over. The next day I put him in his bedroom, closed the gate, and asked him to show me how he climbs over. He looked at me confused and just said, "Harry did it." My stomach turned. I realized that this clearly wasn't an imaginary friend. My friends told me to get a camera and record what was happening in his bedroom overnight. I couldn't do it. I was so scared of what I would see. Not long after this, we went on holiday. When we returned, I went to take our suitcases upstairs and found all of my son's toys lined up perfectly across his bedroom floor. My friend came around that evening, and I was telling her about the toys, when all of a sudden we heard screaming coming from upstairs. I ran into my son's bedroom. He was sitting on his bed, screaming hysterically and pointing at the wall. I looked up at the cupboard, and it was wide open again. After that, he was petrified and wouldn't sleep in his bedroom alone anymore. And a story from Heather in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Spruill Bed and Breakfast. An ex-boyfriend and I planned a Labor Day weekend road trip. we found an adorable, affordable, early 1900s home that had been converted into a Spruill B&B. It lies on farmland in the prairies and is a large 2-story home that was clearly built by prosperous farmers. It is furnished and decorated entirely with period furniture and household items, so entering the home is like stepping back in time. The room we were given was the master bedroom at the front of the house, and it had a door that opened on the second-floor balcony. It's important to note that this is the only room of the home that gave access to that balcony. And being a large old house with high ceilings, there was no possible way anyone could have climbed up to that balcony, as it was up quite high. We admired our room, and noticed the skeleton keys sitting in the old locks on the door to our room, and the door that separated the room from the balcony. And then we went out on the balcony and looked out at the seemingly endless farmland before heading back into our room. Knowing that 3 other rooms in the home held guests that night, before going to sleep in the antique bed, I carefully checked the door to make sure the room was locked, and checked the door that separated our room from the balcony to ensure it too was locked. Satisfied that we safely locked our room, we went to sleep. I was on the side of the bed closer to the balcony, and my ex was on the side closer to the door. Sometime between 4 and 5 a.m., I woke up absolutely freezing. I looked around and noticed that the door to the balcony was wide open. I woke up my ex, and he said that he had not opened it. He was quite tall, and the bed was quite creaky, as were the wooden floorboards, and I'm a person who sleeps quite lightly, so I would have heard him if he had gotten up and opened the balcony door. Both the doors between the hallway and our room and the balcony closed very tightly in the door frames, so it required quite a bit of force to open them. He got up, groggily, and closed the balcony door and locked it, and then checked our room door, which he found was still locked. We looked at each other, shrugged, and then both uneasily covered our heads with the blanket and pretended to sleep for a couple more hours. In the morning, we went downstairs to join the other guests and our hosts for breakfast. As we entered the room, we heard another couple telling the owners about how their bedside light had been switched on and off multiple times during the night, and that woke them up. The owners laughed and replied to them that it was just the ghost. And then they added that they had purchased the home after the ghost had scared the previous owners away. We then told them what had happened to us.
God, it knows I'm here.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
Now look, Doc, we're buddies, okay? But don't try to convert me.
I'm trying to prepare you. My name's Marquay, Dr. Marquay, a scientist interested in the supernatural. The unnatural, if you like. I came to Hill House to find the key to another world. Assisting me in this exploration of the unknown was Eleanor, Nell, who could look back into the past, and Theo, something of a witch, who could see into the future. This is Luke, who didn't believe in anything, until evil, patient and waiting, made him change his mind.
Stop it! God. God. Whose hand was I holding?
How many of us take seriously the things we cannot or do not want to understand, simply because we are afraid?
Eleanor, you Paul! Did you hear me calling?
Oh, this house. You have to watch it every minute.
The Haunting was produced and directed by Robert Wise, brilliant producer of West Side Story. The stars consist of a cross-section of top talent in the world of entertainment. Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, Russ Tamblyn.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace? That some houses, like Hill House, are born bad.
Here's a story from Diana in Frisco, Texas. Pet sitter experience. As a pet sitter, I go to a lot of different houses in the city of Frisco. When we first moved here, there was barely 7,000 people that lived in this area. Cow pastures, meadows, even cotton fields filled a large portion of the land. Now the population is over 100,000. New houses, malls, hospitals, all that growing communities require, have been built. Maybe that is why there tends to be so much unrest. About 8 or 9 years ago, one of my most terrifying incidents to date occurred. I've had many sightings of the unknown, entities, noises, whispers, even doors shutting on their own. This event was totally different than that, and it scared the hell out of me. It was around Christmas, and my sister had come along with me to keep me company. The holidays can be very lonely because I am always too busy to take part in family gatherings. So my sister volunteered to keep me company. I was so happy to have her with me as we went to houses caring for pets. We laughed and joked about memories that we shared. In general, we had a wonderful time just being together. The night was damp and cold, with scattered showers every now and then. We had been to all of the houses except for one. It was another gated community, with a lot of trees and creeks running through the area. Mist was hanging in the trees, and everything was cushioned into silence. We passed the guardhouse and entered into a frankly eerie atmosphere. Only a minute before we had been laughing, but now we were both quiet and somewhat on edge. The home was a very nice 2-story floor plan. I had been there several times before. When we entered, the dog came downstairs from the master bedroom to meet us. We of course talked to the dog as we loved her. After taking her outside and feeding her, my sister looked around the house. The downstairs consisted of a large kitchen area, formal dining room, master bedroom and a bath. A laundry room was on one side that led to a huge garage. The outdoor lights had been installed in the trees, and the landscape looked eerily sinister in the mist that was surrounding us. We went up the stairs that led to a large playroom with a walkway toward the kids' bedrooms. The formal dining area was visible beneath and had a huge window that looked out onto the landscape. We both stood there looking out the window, deep in our thoughts. A fish tank is in the very back bedroom, and I also take care of that. We started walking to the back, and the hair stood up on my arms. I just tried to shake it off, not wanting to scare my sister. She was younger than me, and I had teased her constantly when we were growing up. I took a deep breath and continued walking. All of a sudden, she grabbed my arm tightly and said, "No," in a scared, hushed tone. I looked at her to see absolute terror in her eyes. Even though I teased her, I was also fiercely protective of her. We stood frozen for a second, and then I felt it, even heard it. It was a rustling sound, coming from the bedroom toward the back, on the other side of the fish tank bedroom. My sister sensed it, and it washed over us both. A fear that comes from something unnatural, malignant. The sound was coming from the corner of that bedroom like an immense wave of a horrid atmosphere. I felt it moving from the bedroom into the hall. My sister, totally panic-stricken, was clutching my arm to drag me away. She was also leaving scratches on my arm, trying to get me out of there. I was somewhat paralyzed, until she finally took off to the top of the stairs, screaming at me to come in a wild, frenzied voice that I had never heard before. It pierced me, and finally I began moving backwards, not wanting to take my eyes off the end of that hall, because I saw it was there. It was a shadow. It covered the back wall, but it didn't seem to have any edges. It just kind of ran out of blackness. I believe there is part of a person deep down inside that inherently is repulsed when coming into contact with something soulless. This was vile. I heard my sister actually sobbing for me to come. She didn't want to leave me, but she didn't want to stay in that house. The blackness hadn't moved, but I did. I went to my sister, grabbed her arm, and we went downstairs. It didn't follow us, but we both felt it lurking upstairs. The dog had disappeared into the master bedroom, where it stayed most of the time. I told my sister to go out into the car and start it up and wait for me. She balked at first, but in the most authoritative older sister voice, I demanded that she get out of the house and into the car. I moved around downstairs, locking the back door, turning the lights on for the dog, and just trying to see if whatever it was upstairs was going to come down. I couldn't figure out how a nice home, filled with kids and marvelous parents, could harbor something like that. After a few minutes, I felt the presence dissipating, backing off. After checking on the dog one more time, and making sure she was okay at her spot in the closet of the master bedroom, and seeing she was asleep and in no distress at all, I went out to the car. My sister was white as a sheet and visibly shaking. We drove, without saying a word, into the mist. I had to return to that house 3 or 4 days after that encounter to take care of the dog. I was there in the morning before daybreak, and at night when it was already dark. I tried not to think of what was upstairs when I was busy downstairs, because if I did, I sensed it was picking up on me. My sister begged me not to go back, but I couldn't do that. She would call me on the phone and talk to me when I was there, making sure I was all right. This event was the first, and hopefully the last type of this encounter at someone else's home. You just never know what is lurking about. If you're enjoying Anything Ghost, or you're a fan of Anything Ghost, you need to check out the Anything Ghost VIP group. It's where I house the complete archive of Anything Ghost, dating back to that very first show, Anything Ghost number 1, in January of 2006. So check it out, the Anything Ghost VIP group, one-time membership fee for 12 years of Anything Ghost, www.anythingghost.com, join the VIP group. That's www.anythingghost.com, join the VIP group. It'll make a great Halloween gift for that ghost in your life. Okay, and now back to the real unreal. Here's a story from Emily in Missouri. Unwanted guest. I'll have to give a bit of a backstory in order for this to be understandable. My ex, the father of my child, died last year. He wasn't a very good guy, and to make this short, he was quite dangerous. We split a year prior when my son was only 1 year old. Right before my son's 2nd birthday, my ex hung himself. We never really got along well, and it got worse after we broke up. A year after his death, I was in a new relationship with my son, and I had moved in with my new boyfriend. I was unpacking some of my things and noticed some of my ex's things were mixed in with mine. I went into a rant about my ex to my new boyfriend and about how bad my ex was. My boyfriend and I talked about it for a while, and then he went to take a nap downstairs. My son was with my mom at the time. While my boyfriend was taking a nap, I was upstairs folding laundry. We have one of those alarm systems that announces when a door or window is opened, and while I was upstairs doing laundry, I heard the system say, "Front door open." I thought perhaps my boyfriend had got up for some reason, so I went downstairs to make sure he was okay, and found the front door wide open. My boyfriend was still asleep downstairs. A few months passed, and nothing significant really happened. Then, a few weeks ago, I began hearing whispering when I would lay down at night to sleep, along with a horrible feeling of being watched. I figured I was just being paranoid and freaking myself out, seeing how I was the only one home with my son at night. My boyfriend and I have opposite shifts, so I'm usually home without him in the evenings. This continued to happen until last week, when again my boyfriend was at work. My son was asleep for the night. I'd put him down around 8 p.m. I went down to the stairs to clean my son's toys and heard a loud gasp, almost as if it was right next to me. It startled me a bit, and my nerves were on edge at that point. I quickly cleaned up and went upstairs to the kitchen to make something to eat. Our house is a split California type, so the kitchen is on a higher level, and you can see the stairs and the living room from the kitchen. As I was making myself something to eat, I had a stomach-sinking, awful feeling of dread. And then I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. The whole time I heard those footsteps, I didn't see anything coming up the stairs. My ex hated me with a passion after we split. I wouldn't be surprised if that was him still lingering around. And carrying on now with the story from Precious in the Philippines. Stop. It has been 15 years since it happened, and I still don't know what to make of it. I was 11 at the time, a hot summer day in the Philippines, when I found myself staring across a busy street for no reason. Suddenly, everything became quiet, and I heard a vivid voice that said, translated, "Come." I have no idea why it happened, or why I crossed that dreadful, busy street. I was really drawn to it. Suddenly, I felt a tug on my left shoulder, and a voice, translated, "Stop." And I did. I think you can guess what happened next. My auditory senses came back, and all I heard was the sound of a white car screeching to a halt. I turned to my left and saw its front bumper touching my leg slightly. I saw the horrific faces of the dad in the car and the mom and the daughter in the back seat. I was safe. I could not believe it. I was not even scared at all. I looked to my left and my right, then crossed the street safely. I did not even know what had just transpired until a lady vendor across the street asked me, translated, "Little girl, how old are you?" I couldn't speak at all. I just smiled at the old lady. When I got safely into a public jeepney, it all came rushing in. I could have been dead, if I didn't stop or feel that tug on my left shoulder. I started crying in the jeepney and thanked God for another life of mine. To this day, I still do not know what to make of it. It is a nice thought that it was my guardian angel who saved me that day. It might have been, or at least I hope it was my dad who saved me that day. Have you had something similar that happened to you before? And here's a self-narrated story from Emily in Middleburg, Florida. Growing up in southern Alabama.
Hi, Lex. I'm going to tell you a story about when my sister and I were growing up in southern Alabama. We grew up in a small two-bedroom home on a tiny little road that backed up to a cow pasture. There were maybe 8 or 10 other houses on the road. All of them were in a line on one side of it. Across the street was a cornfield and a pond. In my memories, the house was very large. However, when I go back to look at it now, I am taken aback at how small it really is. I lived here with my mom, dad, and sister, who is 2 years younger than I am. She was born premature. My mom gave birth to my sister at 26 weeks. My sister is a twin. Her twin died in utero, causing the early labor for my mom. Many babies born that early today in 2018 aren't strong enough to survive. My sister was born in 1981. The technology of that day and time wasn't anything close to what we have now to support babies born so early. However, she is a fighter, always has been. She was in the hospital 9 months before my parents brought her home, and in and out of the hospital many, many times after that. When she came home from the hospital, it was with oxygen tanks and tubes and several different daily medicines. Her early birth delayed her development processes by months. She didn't walk until she was 18 months old. My mom had made friends with a couple of the nurses from the hospital, and they kept in touch after my sister was discharged. My sister's main nurse, Michelle, came to visit our home and see my sister several times, although she lived about an hour away. I tell you that story to tell you these stories. One summer day in 1982, a storm came through our small town as it usually does. Our power went out. My sister's oxygen tank was connected to our power. No power equals no oxygen. My mom was home with us kids, and my sister's nurse just happened to be visiting that day. My sister stopped breathing. My mom scooped me up and put me in the car. My sister's nurse started CPR in the front seat, and we went to the emergency room. I don't remember any of this, as I was only about 3 or so when it happened. My sister was barely 1. As my mom tells the story now, the ER staff met them at the door, took my sister and resuscitated her. She was technically dead for a very short amount of time. Long story short, she recovered and a few days later went home again from the hospital. A couple of years later, when my sister was healthier and walking and talking with her oxygen tubes, her nurse was over visiting again. My mom and the nurse sat together in our den talking and catching up. My sister and I played on the floor around them. My sister stopped playing for a moment and looked up at her nurse. Interrupting my mom's conversation, my sister asked, "Michelle, do you remember that time I died and you had to carry me to the hospital?" And went back to playing with me like nothing had happened. My mom says she and Michelle stopped and stared at each other. How did my sister know about that? It wasn't a story that was repeated at my house in recent years. My mom said she told the story to some family members several years earlier, just after the event happened, but my sister was barely 1. Would she have remembered the retelling of that story from 4 or 5 years earlier when she was a baby? My sister had several little quirks about her through the years. Sometimes my mom would get up to check on her at night, only to find my sister had crawled out of her crib. Remember, she couldn't walk yet. Crawled down the hallway, pulling her oxygen tank behind her, and would be sitting in front of our sliding glass doors looking up at the sky. This happened several times. Once my sister was a bit older, maybe 3 or 4. She would get scared at night and seek comfort in my parents' bed, as children do. She was very tiny, and she would always crawl up in the middle between them. On those nights, she would wake my mom up asking, "Mom, who's that man in the corner?" And she'd also say, "Mom, who's that man over there with the red eyes?" She would also see people in the shadows regularly. One morning, she was maybe 4 years old, and we were sitting at our kitchen bar eating our breakfast. The curtains in front of the sliding glass door was open, and we could see outside into the rabbit pen, where we had a couple of pet rabbits who we adored. My sister stopped eating and looked directly out the door and into the rabbit pen. "I want those rabbits to die," she said, and went back to eating her oatmeal as if nothing odd had just been announced at breakfast. I looked at my mom, and she looked at me. We were definitely struck by what my sister had said, but because she stopped talking about it immediately, we kind of dropped it and went back to our business. The rest of the day and night went normally. However, when we all woke up the next morning, both of the rabbits lay dead in their pen. I remember it clearly as I went out with my mom to feed them. They were just laying there, no injuries. It wasn't cold at that time of year, so they didn't freeze. To this day, we don't know what happened to our poor rabbits. My sister isn't the only one who had experiences in that house. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I would wake up scared in the middle of the night and go find safety in my parents' bed. My dad always slept on the side of the bed that was next to the door. The bedroom was very small, and so there wasn't much space between the edge of the bed and the door frame that led into the hallway. They always slept with their door open. When I got into their bed, I tried to do so without much commotion. If I didn't wake them up, they wouldn't send me back to my room. This one particular night, I slid into their bed on my dad's side. I curled up next to him, but was on the edge of the bed facing the hallway. I remember feeling safe and comfortable and started falling back to sleep. At one point, my eyes opened again, and what I saw terrifies me to this day. Stumbling down my hallway towards the open door to my parents' bedroom was a very old woman. She had her gray hair pulled back and had the meanest look on her face. Her eyes were black and her mouth was in a frown. But the strangest thing of all is that she was carrying a pot. The pot was one of those big boiling pots like you would boil pasta in or something large. She was carrying it with her bare hands, and the tips of her fingers were burnt off. She was walking down the hallway and her eyes were fixed on me. I was terrified. I rolled over and hid my face in my dad's arm and put my whole body, head and all, under the blankets. I remember to this day laying there, scared to look because I was afraid of what I would see. In my mind, the name Bertha popped up. I know that sounds weird. It was weird to me, too. My great-grandmother's name is Bertha. She passed away a few years before I was born. I never knew her, but I had seen pictures of her and knew what she looked like even back then. I don't know if my mind associated this scary woman to the few pictures of my great-grandmother that I had seen at that point in my life and connected the two in my brain, or if that was my great-grandmother putting that name in my mind. Whatever it was, it terrified me. I didn't tell my parents the next day, though I never really forgot about it. Several years later, my parents had divorced, and my mom, sister, and I were living with my grandmother. My sister and I were eating dinner with my grandmother one night at the dinner table. We were talking about ghosts and such, just being silly. I started telling my grandmother the story of that night in my parents' room. Before I even got halfway done with the story, my sister interrupted me. She said, "Were her fingers burned off?" Stunned, I asked her how she knew. She said she saw the same thing a few years back. It scared her so badly she never told anyone. What did we see? Was it really my great-grandmother coming back to scare us? Why would she do that? Or was it an entity trying to scare us and my child's mind connected it to an old photo of my great-grandmother? And why did the same thing happen to my sister? As I get older, I have started to believe that it could have been my imagination running wild and scary thoughts seeping into my mind on a night when I was already scared. I don't know. I guess I never will. While we lived in that little house on that tiny road in southern Alabama, many scary things happened to us. We would see things in the corners of the house, or the door wouldn't open to our bedroom, trapping us temporarily inside. I no longer live in Alabama. However, I have a lot of extended family members who still do. My mom, sister, and I regularly drive home to visit. On one of our trips, I thought it would be fun to show my children where their mom grew up. I drove them out to the old house. Sadly, a tree had fallen through it from a recent storm, so we didn't stop. But I tried to visit again a couple of years later. We got lucky this time. The current owner was standing outside watering her plants. We pulled up and got out to have a quick chat. She was the lady that had bought the house from my parents, so she was the only one to live there with her family all of these years. The house had been repaired from the fallen tree, and she was more than happy to let me take a couple of pictures of my children on the front porch as a memento. I got up the courage to ask her if she had ever experienced anything odd in the house. She said she never has had any strange happenings there, which is a relief and a worry. Why did my sister and I see such things and no one else ever did? Was my sister sort of a light for spirits? Neither of us experience any paranormal activity now that we're out of the house. We sort of laugh about these events now, but I don't think either of us would ever feel comfortable sleeping in that house again.
Here's a story from Leah in Independence, Montana. The Door Jiggler. The last time I wrote you, I mentioned that I was moving to a city called Independence, Montana, which has various ghost stories and supposedly haunted places, some of which are within blocks of where I live. I honestly did not think I would have another story to tell, but here it goes. A couple months ago, late one night, I was sitting in my living room watching television. My boyfriend was away at band practice, and I knew he would be back to my place sometime within the hour. So it was no surprise to me when I heard his key jingling in the lock of the front door, which was across the room at my back. He didn't immediately come in, and I heard it jingling in the door lock again. A few seconds later, he still had not opened the door. Assuming he was having trouble with his copied key, I walked over to let him in. When I opened the door, there was nobody there. Half an hour later, when he did arrive, I asked if he had stopped by earlier, but then perhaps left to grab something that he had forgotten. He said he had not been by at all until just then. I told him what had happened, and he suggested that maybe one of the 3 cats jiggled the doorknob. I thought nothing of it after that, until a few weeks later. I was at home alone, and again sitting on my couch watching television, when I heard what sounded like a jiggling and metal tapping on the front door. It sounded as if it was coming from the inside of the room, so I quickly turned around, thinking the cats were at it again. That was when I realized all 3 of my cats were on the opposite side of the room from the door and staring at something in that direction. I knew then that I had definitely heard the tapping, since they heard it too. I sat, staring for just a moment, and then walked over to the door. And even though the sound had seemed to be inside the house, I couldn't see what would have possibly made it. I peered out the small window in the door while turning on the porch light. When I saw no one there, I opened it, and no one was there or around my house. I shut and locked the door, and then sat back down and watched my cats as they all 3 stood frozen, staring at the entryway. They did not stop staring for at least another 5 minutes. Finally, it was like whatever had their attention left, because they all at the same time snapped out of their trance and walked over to the door, sniffing around, as if searching for something that had disappeared. For months, I have come home to items moved around and various cabinets in my kitchen that have been left open. The entire time, I have also blamed all these things on my cats. Now I've begun to wonder if it is something more. And next up, we have a story from Sergeant Mike in Canal, Winchester, Ohio. Ghost Patrol. I've been a police officer for approximately 17 years. When I first graduated from the police academy, I got a job with a small suburb just outside Cleveland, Ohio. Because there was very little crime inside the city, and I was a young officer, I spent most of my time running traffic on the highway, working the midnight shift. One cold January night about 2:30 a.m., I was traveling eastbound, heading to my favorite spot to run radar. While en route, I saw a female walking westbound. Seeing people walk down the side of the highway is not unusual. Sometimes their cars would run out of gas or break down. I only saw the female for a brief time, as I was traveling about 70 miles an hour in the opposite direction, and a grass median separated the east and westbound lanes. I called the female into our dispatch center and gave the mile marker where I saw the female walking. I traveled up the highway for about 2 minutes and turned around to make contact with the female. I found it odd that I did not see her vehicle on the side of the highway broken down. While I traveled to the turnaround, I remember thinking she must be cold walking that far. Anyway, I turned around and spotted the area, but failed to locate the female. I had no idea where she could have gone. I do know that it was a physical impossibility that she would have made it to the next exit ramp, because it was 4 miles away. On the side of the highway was a fenced-in wooded area. From the time I saw her, turned around, and made it back to her location was less than 5 minutes. I shrugged it off and went on my way, until I met up with some veteran officers for lunch about 5 a.m. They asked me about what I saw. I explained that I didn't get a good look at her face, but noticed she had long blonde hair and was skinny. They informed me that several years ago, long before cell phones, a female had run out of gas and was walking along the side of the highway. She was struck and killed by a passing car in that same area. The officers stated that they get calls regarding a female walking in that area of the highway at night. They give the same description, but we are never able to locate her. I thought the veteran cops were trying to scare me because I was new to the force, but that changed when I walked into the dispatch center and talked to one of the oldest dispatchers. She confirmed they actually do receive calls about a female walking in that area at that time of night. She pulled up records of callers calling in about her and giving the same description that I gave. I never saw her again for 2 years while I was working in the department. I'm still a police officer in a much larger city, but I do still think about that night sometimes. A story from Abby in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Other Daddy. This isn't my story, but it stuck with me for the past 5 years of my life. It was my first year of college, and I started to make some friends in my classes. I made friends with, let's call him Jared, in my math class. The semester went on, and we spoke every day, and one day I noticed how tired he looked. I just thought it was because of his workload, and I knew he had 2 young sons at home. He's just tired from going to school and working part-time. A few weeks went by, and he still looked exhausted. At that point, I was a little worried about him, so I asked him if he was getting enough sleep at night. He turned to me and sighed and told me, "Well, not really. My son keeps coming into my wife and I's bedroom at night and waking us up. He just can't sleep by himself anymore. He even shares a bedroom with his older brother, but he keeps getting scared." I gave him my sympathies and told him to ask his son why he wouldn't stay in his bed at night. We turned our attention back to class as the professor started speaking. We didn't discuss it any further until the following week. He turned to me before class started and said he was a little worried. I asked him why, and he just replied, "I think my son is haunted." I just sort of laughed it off until I noticed how seriously worried he looked. "Okay, why do you think he's haunted?" "Well, I did what you said and I asked him why he can't sleep through the night, but his brother can. Why can't you be like your brother and sleep in your own bed?" He told me that the other daddy keeps waking him up at night. At that point, I was a little spooked, but I told him to continue and asked my son who this other daddy was. He said there's a tall man who is in all black, and he stands at the end of my bed. He wakes me up every night." I asked him what he did to wake him up, and my son did that sort of cough that clears your throat, and he said he does that all night. So I asked him if he had been doing it for the past month, and he said yes. My son continued on and said that the other daddy is always there at night in the corner of the room when we tuck him in bed. I looked at Jared. He was freaking out. I got chills down my spine. Jared put his head in his hands and said, "I don't know what to do. I don't know if it's his imagination or if he's really seeing something, because they say children are more susceptible to these sorts of things." I took a minute to take this in, and then I realized Jared and his wife had just bought this house and had moved in at the beginning of the school year. I just told him to wait it out, and maybe it's just him being overactive with his imagination, or maybe it's just an excuse for him to sleep with both of you. I tried to brush it off and calm him down, even though it scared me. Another few weeks went by without a word about other daddy. Then, the week before break, I sat down and Jared said, "My other son said he sees other daddy too." I just looked at him and my heart dropped. Jared said, "I don't really know what to do. They're both genuinely scared, and there's nothing I can do about it. We just bought this house, and we can't just up and move again." I mentioned getting a psychic or a priest to bless the house or cleanse it somehow. Unfortunately, I didn't have any other classes with Jared, and we lost contact after the following semester. We never spoke about other daddy again. I just hope to this day that other daddy has moved on, or they ended up leaving that house. And that's all I have for stories for Anything Ghost, but I'm going to add one story from the Anything Ghost archive. And it's self-narrated, and I actually transcribed it and put it into my new book, Anything Ghost Volume 2, True Encounters with Ghosts. And it's from Jay in Florida. It was a popular story, The Loop.
Okay, so this is the telling of an event that happened to me when I was 13 years old. And if anyone has any knowledge on the subject and can even begin to explain what happened to me, I would greatly appreciate it. So when I was much younger, a lot of the time on the weekends, I would be home alone. My younger sibling would usually be staying the night with one of his friends or one of our cousins. And my mother and father, they would usually be partying next door with the neighbors. They were very social. So one weekend in particular, I was playing some Sega Genesis, and I decided, you know what, I'm finna get in the shower. So while I'm in the shower, everything seems to be going pretty smoothly, when all of a sudden, the shower curtain just jerks back. And I'm standing face to face with a strange man that I don't know. I don't know him at all. Involuntarily, my body kind of jerks in the direction of what's going on, and I slip and I fall. When I slipped and I fell, the back of my head hit the back of the tub, and I winced because it hurt pretty bad. After I recovered from wincing, I looked toward the man to see if he was still there, and he was gone. Not a trace of him in sight. So I sat there for a couple of seconds, kind of froze, and I jumped up out of the tub, and I ran toward the bathroom door, and I locked it. My heart's pounding, I'm breathing hard, I'm scared, I'm shaking, and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do next, because the bathroom door is pretty flimsy. It's not as if it's like a front door or a back door. It can be easily kicked in, I mean, it's just not a lot between me and him, I'm thinking at the time. So I figured that I had to figure something out. I couldn't just stay in the bathroom because in my mind, it would be easy for him to get me. I don't know if like I said, I don't know if he's there to rob the place or kill me or what. So I get dressed, and I decide that the best course of action would be for me to make a beeline straight for the front door, which is about roughly 20 feet away from the bathroom. I figured that I could make it. I mean, I was a pretty swift child. I played sports and things. I figured, I was confident that I can make it. So now I'm going to do this, and I make a beeline toward the door, which was kind of risky because we didn't keep a lot of lights on in the house, only the lights that we needed, and the light over the top of the stove, so it was kind of dim, but it was dark in the house. Anyway, so I make the beeline toward the door, and I get to the door, and I'm out. Run across the street to the neighbor's house, and I begin to, I run straight through the door. I don't knock on it. I just go straight through the door, and I run to my mom. I'm bent over. I'm breathing hard. She's trying to figure out what's happening to me. So after I catch my breath, I explain to her what happened, and she jumps up. She runs to where my father's at, and she tells them what happens, and the neighbor grabs his gun, and they start walking toward the house. So my mom's screaming, "Do you want me to call the police?" And he's like, "No, just let me go check this out. I can handle this." Yada, yada, yada. So about 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, they come back and they say that there's no one in the house and they can see basically they're saying that they can see no evidence of a break-in. And everything seems exactly as it should be in the house. We go home that night, and we all huddle up in the same room, in their room, and we sleep. And the last thing I remember is my dad kind of sitting up in the chair in the room and just kind of keeping watch. Nothing happens after that. I mean, everything just goes back to being normal. Like, I'm weirded out, but nothing happens. Just life just kind of goes on. A couple of years later, I joined the Navy, and I do a bit of traveling and this, that, and the third, and I get out. So now I'm around the age of 22, and I come back home. I had moved roughly about an hour and a half away from where my parents lived at, but I wanted to come home for the 4th of July to visit them. Usually on the 4th of July, if I'm there, we'll all go down to the bay and watch the fireworks, because the bay is about 3 blocks away from where my parents' house is. So we just kind of walk there all together and we watch the fireworks. But that day, when I woke up that morning, I just didn't feel well. It's like I couldn't get my bearings. I was nauseous. I had a bad headache, a terrible headache, and I just didn't feel well. So it became time. It was right before dusk. It became time for us to get ready to walk down to the bay, and my mom asked me if I was going to go, and I told her no. I just don't feel well. I'm not going to be able to make it. I apologize, because I know she really wanted me to be there. She told me not to worry about it. They were going to go anyways, and they would be back shortly. So I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. So I was, thinking, take some Tylenol, maybe watch some TV, whatever. So then I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to get in the shower, because maybe if I take me a hot shower, I'll feel better. Walk into the bathroom, put everything down, and I pull back the curtain, the shower curtain. And this is when things get really weird. When I pull back the shower curtain, I see myself in the shower. I see my younger self standing in the shower, and we're looking at each other face to face. And I'm shocked, and I know what's happening. Like, I immediately remember it from the other side. So I know what's happening, but I'm scared anyways, because my mind cannot make sense of what's happening. It's like my mind cannot process it properly. So I see myself, my younger self, fall in the tub and hit his head, and I hit my head. I don't even know how to word it right. But anyways, I start backing up because I'm at this point I'm just trying to get away. I can't, I'm scared, I don't know what's happening, I'm trying to get away from what's happening. So as I'm backing away, I trip and fall. I roll over and I crawl toward the bathroom door. I open it up and I crawl out the bathroom and shut it behind me. I'm sitting there on my hands and knees, breathing hard, trying to figure out what just happened. What is this? Like, this is crazy. This is crazy. I get up, I kind of walk around, I pace for a couple of minutes, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back in the bathroom. So what I do is I like a coward. What I do is I open the bathroom door, but I open it slowly, and I'm standing behind the wall, and I kind of peek my head around the corner to see what's going on in there. Like, what? I don't know what I'm going to see. I don't know if I'm going to see a ghost or an alien. I don't know what I'm going to see at this point. This is crazy. So I open the door, I peek my head around the corner, and nothing's in the shower. So I walk in the bathroom, and I walk toward the shower, and I want to examine the shower to see what's going on. And the shower is dry, as if no one was ever in there. And I distinctly remember seeing my younger self in the shower, and the water's running, of course, right? And I also remember that when I was standing face to face with myself, that there was no sound, even though the water was running, and I see it running, and I see the water hitting myself. I can hear nothing. It's as silent as if nothing's happening. I sit there for a couple of seconds, and then I walk back out into the living room. I sit there and I wait for my parents to come home. And I explain to them everything that happened, and they're just kind of vexed, and they don't understand what's happening. They can't really, but they remember. But I'm explaining to them. I'm like, you remember when, way back when I saw the man in the shower, Mom? It wasn't the man. It was me. It was me. It just happened, and I think I just seen it from the other side. I think I ran into myself. So of course she's kind of laughing, and she's asking me stuff like, "What are you smoking, son?" and all that stuff. But my father, he's like, "Well, maybe you got caught in a time loop." And I'm like, "Well, I don't even know what that means, Pops." Well, anyways, that's the event. That's what happened to me, and like I said, I can't explain it, or I've never heard anything quite like it before. So it's kind of crazy, but I hope you guys enjoy it. Take care.
And that's it for Anything Goes Show number 250. And I'm putting together the big Halloween show for 2018. So remember those deadlines, October 13th and October 17th. The 13th is if you want me to read it. The 17th is if you self-narrate it. And again, no nonfiction. It's all ghostly and stories as such. All right, everybody. Thanks for all your stories. Don't forget about my new book I just mentioned. Anything Goes Volume 2. Look for it in iBooks or Kindle. And print coming soon. And don't forget about the VIP group. A one-time membership fee, anythinggoes.com. Join the VIP group.